They framed me for a crime I did not commit. They took my company, my name, and my freedom. And years later, I walked back into their boardroom, and I watched their faces change forever. If you believe that truth always finds its way back into the light, then stay with me until the very end of this video. Because this story is one of the most satisfying comebacks you will ever hear. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because on this channel, we tell real stories of ordinary people who were betrayed by those closest to them and who found the strength to take back everything that was stolen. My name in this story is Michael. I was 34 years old when my own family destroyed everything I had built and made the entire world believe I was a criminal. This is not just a story about business. This is a story about family, about betrayal, about the price of trust, and about what happens when the person you underestimate comes back stronger than you ever imagined. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a family that valued one thing above everything else: success. My father, a man named Richard, built a mid-sized manufacturing company from nothing, starting with a single small warehouse and a handful of employees. By the time I was in my 20s, that company, Harlow Industries, had grown into a respected name in industrial equipment, with contracts across 3 countries and a reputation for quality that took decades to build. I was not handed my position in the company. I earned it. I started on the factory floor during college summers, learning every single part of the business from the ground up. I worked in logistics, then in operations, then in sales, before finally moving into an executive role in my late 20s. My father wanted to make sure that when I eventually took a leadership position, I actually understood the business, not just the title. My cousin, a man named Trevor, worked at the company as well. Trevor was 2 years older than me, the son of my father's older brother, my uncle Walter. Walter had always been involved in the business too, holding a significant share of the company since its early days, back when he had lent my father money to get the business off the ground. On paper, Walter and Trevor were family. In reality, I would later learn, they saw the company not as something to nurture, but as something to eventually control entirely. Growing up, Trevor and I were close, or at least I believed we were. We spent holidays together, worked side by side during summers, and I considered him one of my best friends, not just a cousin. I trusted him completely, the kind of trust you only give to someone you believe would never betray you. That trust would later become the very weapon used against me. As the years passed, my father's health began to decline. He suffered a stroke when I was 32, which left him unable to continue actively running the company. The board decided, with my father's full support, that I would take over as chief executive officer, continuing the legacy he had spent his life building. This decision, while logical and well-earned, created a deep and dangerous resentment within Walter and Trevor. Walter believed that because he had been involved since the company's earliest days, his branch of the family deserved more control, more shares, more influence. Trevor, feeling overshadowed by my rise to CEO, began quietly building alliances within the company, alliances I would not fully understand until it was almost too late. At first, the signs were small, easy to miss if you were not paying close attention. Trevor would make subtle comments during board meetings, questioning decisions I made, always framed as concern rather than direct opposition. Walter would meet privately with certain board members, meetings I only heard about through hallway conversations, always described as simply catching up with old friends. I remember one evening, my father, still recovering but mentally sharp, called me into his study. He looked at me with a seriousness I had rarely seen before. "Michael," he said, "be careful with Walter and Trevor. Family and business rarely mix well, especially when ego and money are involved." I remember nodding, acknowledging his concern, but not truly understanding the depth of the danger he was warning me about. I trusted Trevor too much to imagine he could ever betray me. That trust would soon become the foundation of the worst betrayal of my life. About 18 months into my role as CEO, the company began pursuing a major international expansion, a deal that would triple our manufacturing capacity through a partnership with a large overseas distributor. This deal represented years of strategic planning, careful negotiation, and significant financial investment. It was, without exaggeration, the most important deal in the company's entire history. I led the negotiations personally, spending months traveling internationally, building relationships, and finalizing contracts that would secure the company's future for the next generation. Trevor was involved in certain aspects of the deal as well, specifically handling some of the financial documentation and compliance paperwork, a responsibility I gave him because I trusted him, and because I wanted him to feel included in this historic moment for our family's company. This decision would become the exact opportunity Trevor and Walter needed. As the deal moved toward finalization, I began noticing small inconsistencies in certain financial reports, numbers that did not quite align with what I remembered discussing during negotiations. When I brought these inconsistencies to Trevor's attention, he brushed them off as simple accounting errors, promising to correct them immediately. I trusted him, and I moved forward, focused entirely on completing this critical international deal. What I did not know, what I could not have possibly imagined, was that Trevor had been quietly altering financial documents for months, creating a paper trail that made it appear as though funds from the company were being funneled into personal offshore accounts that were, in reality, secretly set up under my name without my knowledge. Imagine building something with your entire heart and soul, working tirelessly to secure your family's future, while someone you trusted completely was quietly building a case to destroy you. The international deal finalized successfully, and for a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. The company celebrated one of its greatest achievements in history. I remember standing in front of employees during the celebration dinner, thanking everyone for their hard work, genuinely proud of what we had accomplished together. Trevor stood near the back of the room that night, smiling, clapping along with everyone else. I remember catching his eye briefly, and something in his expression felt slightly off, though I dismissed it as simple exhaustion from the demanding months we had all just endured. 3 weeks later, everything I had built came crashing down in a single afternoon. I was called into an emergency board meeting, told only that there was a serious financial concern that needed immediate attention. When I walked into that boardroom, the atmosphere felt different immediately, tense, cold, unlike any meeting I had ever experienced. Walter sat at the head of the table, a position he had no official authority to occupy. Trevor sat beside him, along with 2 board members I did not recognize, and a lawyer I had never met. Before I could even sit down, Walter slid a folder across the table toward me. "Michael," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to discuss serious allegations of financial fraud involving the recent international expansion deal." I remember laughing, actually laughing, thinking this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But as I opened that folder, my stomach dropped. Bank statements, wire transfer records, offshore account documentation, all bearing my name, all showing millions of dollars transferred out of company funds during the negotiation period of our biggest deal in company history. "This is not real," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. "I never opened these accounts. I never authorized these transfers." Trevor spoke next, his voice filled with practiced sincerity. "Michael, we found this documentation during a routine financial audit. We did not want to believe it either, but the evidence is right here." I looked around the room, searching for any sign of support, any sign that someone believed me. Instead, I saw expressions of disappointment, distrust, and in some cases, barely concealed satisfaction. Imagine the horror of realizing in that exact moment that you were not just facing false accusations, but a carefully constructed conspiracy designed specifically to destroy you. Within days, the situation escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined. Walter, using his influence and long-standing relationships within the company and legal community, quietly pushed for an internal investigation that quickly became a formal legal matter. The evidence, fabricated as it was, appeared shockingly legitimate. Digital trails, forged signatures, offshore accounts registered using stolen personal information, all pointing directly at me as the person responsible for embezzling company funds during our most critical business deal. I hired a lawyer immediately, a good one, but even he looked at the evidence initially and hesitated slightly before agreeing to represent me, the doubt clearly visible in his eyes. Imagine how it feels when even your own legal representative briefly questions your innocence, simply because the fabricated evidence against you appears so convincing. The board, under Walter's growing influence, voted to suspend me from my position as CEO pending the investigation, Trevor, conveniently, was appointed interim CEO during my suspension, a decision that should have raised immediate suspicion. But by this point, panic and confusion had spread so thoroughly through the company that few people paused to question the timing. My father, still recovering from his stroke, was devastated by the accusations, though even in his weakened state, he never once believed I was guilty. He tried desperately to intervene, but Walter had spent months, possibly years, quietly building alliances within the board, alliances strong enough to override even my father's influence. Within 2 months, formal criminal charges were filed against me: financial fraud, embezzlement, and international wire fraud, charges serious enough to carry decades of potential prison time. I remember sitting in my lawyer's office, staring blankly at the charges, feeling as though my entire life was being erased in real time. The company issued a public statement distancing itself from me completely, framing the situation as evidence of my personal greed and betrayal of shareholder trust. Local news outlets picked up the story immediately, painting me as a corrupt executive who had exploited his own family's company for personal financial gain. Imagine watching your own reputation, something built over years of hard work and integrity, completely destroyed within a matter of weeks, based entirely on evidence fabricated by people you once trusted completely. My marriage, already strained from the stress of the international deal, collapsed under the weight of the scandal. My wife at the time, unable to handle the public humiliation and financial uncertainty, filed for divorce just 3 months after the charges were announced. Friends distanced themselves. Business associates stopped returning calls. Even some extended family members quietly sided with Walter and Trevor, believing the fabricated evidence over years of personal history with me. I was, for the first time in my life, completely alone. The legal battle that followed was brutal, exhausting, and financially devastating. Because company assets and accounts had been frozen pending investigation, and because Trevor now controlled my access to company resources, I found myself financially crippled, forced to spend nearly everything I had personally saved just to fund my legal defense. My lawyer worked tirelessly, uncovering inconsistencies within the fabricated evidence. But proving fabrication in complex international financial documentation takes time, resources, and access to forensic accounting experts, resources that were rapidly disappearing. After 18 months of relentless legal battles, my defense team successfully identified several critical flaws within the fabricated evidence, inconsistencies in digital timestamps, and irregularities within the offshore banking documentation that suggested clear forgery. However, before we could fully expose these inconsistencies in court, prosecutors, under significant pressure from Walter's connections within local business and political circles, offered me a plea deal. Plead guilty to a reduced charge, avoid a lengthy public trial, and receive a significantly reduced sentence. My lawyer advised strongly against it, insisting the evidence in our favor was strong enough to eventually win at trial. But exhausted, financially devastated, and emotionally broken after 18 months of relentless legal battle, I made a decision I would question for years afterward. I accepted the plea deal. I served 14 months in prison for a crime I never committed. Imagine spending over a year of your life in confinement, stripped of your freedom, your reputation, your family's company, all because 2 people you once considered your closest family fabricated evidence out of pure greed and jealousy. During my time in prison, I had countless hours to reflect, to relive every single moment leading up to my downfall, searching for any sign I had missed, any moment I could have prevented this betrayal. I realized then that Trevor and Walter had likely been planning this for years, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity, the international deal, to create fabricated evidence significant enough to completely remove me from the company permanently. This realization did something to me. It transformed my pain into absolute determination. I decided that the moment I was released, I would dedicate every ounce of my energy toward proving my complete innocence, not simply for myself, but to reclaim everything that had been stolen from me, and to expose Trevor and Walter for exactly who they truly were. Upon my release, I discovered something that gave me renewed hope. My lawyer, during my time in prison, had continued quietly working on my case, collaborating with an international forensic accounting expert who specialized in exposing sophisticated financial fraud. Together, they had uncovered undeniable digital evidence proving that the offshore accounts used in my case had actually been created and controlled remotely from IP addresses linked directly to Trevor's personal devices, not mine. Imagine the relief and fury combined, discovering concrete proof of exactly who had destroyed your life, sitting right there waiting to be presented. This evidence became the foundation of an entirely new legal strategy, one aimed not just at clearing my name domestically, but internationally, since the fraudulent offshore accounts had been established across multiple countries, creating international legal implications that Trevor and Walter had clearly failed to anticipate. Over the following 2 years, my legal team worked meticulously, building an airtight case using cutting-edge digital forensic evidence, international banking records, and expert testimony from cybersecurity specialists who specialized in tracing digital footprints across global financial networks. During this time, I lived quietly, deliberately avoiding public attention, working small consulting jobs under an assumed professional identity to support myself financially, while my legal team built the case that would eventually clear my name completely. I want you to understand something important about this period of my life. While Trevor and Walter believed I was gone permanently, defeated, humiliated, and forgotten, I was quietly rebuilding, gathering strength, patience, and evidence, preparing for the moment I would finally reclaim everything they had stolen from me. After nearly 3 years of relentless legal work, my case was finally presented before an international financial crimes tribunal, given the cross-border nature of the fabricated offshore accounts. The evidence was undeniable. Digital forensic experts testified clearly, showing conclusive proof that Trevor had personally created and controlled the offshore accounts used to frame me, using sophisticated but ultimately traceable digital methods. Banking records confirmed that funds transferred during the original international deal had actually been redirected, through a complex web of shell companies, directly into accounts secretly controlled by Trevor and Walter themselves. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, watching years of fabricated lies completely unravel in front of international legal authorities, watching the exact people who destroyed your life finally facing consequences for their actions. My conviction was completely overturned. Not just reduced, not just appealed, but entirely vacated, with the tribunal officially recognizing that I had been the victim of deliberate, sophisticated financial fraud orchestrated specifically to remove me from my rightful position within the company. Walter and Trevor, on the other hand, faced immediate international legal consequences, including formal charges of financial fraud, identity theft, and international wire fraud, charges carrying significantly harsher penalties than the ones originally used against me. But clearing my name legally, while incredibly important, was only the first step. Because during my years of exile, Trevor had used his position as CEO to slowly consolidate control over Harlow Industries, manipulating board members, buying out smaller shareholders, and positioning himself as the company's permanent and unquestionable leader. My father, weakened significantly by years of stress and health complications, had unfortunately passed away during my time in prison, having never seen my name cleared, but having always, until his final breath, believed completely in my innocence. This loss became both my deepest pain and my strongest motivation. I was determined to reclaim not just my reputation, but the company my father had spent his entire life building, the legacy Trevor and Walter had tried to steal completely. With my name officially cleared, I began quietly rebuilding my case to reclaim my rightful ownership and leadership position within Harlow Industries. Because much of the original fraud had involved manipulation of company shares and fraudulent removal of my ownership stake, the International Tribunal's ruling also restored my original shareholder rights, giving me legal standing to challenge Trevor's leadership directly. However, I knew that simply presenting legal documents privately would not be enough. Trevor had spent years building a false narrative, carefully positioning himself as the company's savior, someone who had cleaned up the mess left behind by my supposed corruption. Employees, business partners, and remaining family members had been fed this narrative for years, and I understood that reclaiming my position required not just legal victory, but public, undeniable exposure of the truth, presented in exactly the place where Trevor and Walter had originally destroyed me. The boardroom. I worked closely with my legal team to identify the perfect moment for my return, choosing a date that coincided with a major board meeting where Trevor was scheduled to finalize an enormous new international partnership deal, ironically similar in scale to the very deal used to originally frame me. This meeting represented Trevor's biggest moment as CEO, an opportunity for him to solidify his position permanently within the company and among international business partners. It was the perfect moment for me to return. I planned my re-entry carefully and quietly, ensuring complete legal documentation was ready, prepared to present undeniable evidence the moment I walked back into that boardroom. I did not inform anyone at the company of my return, choosing instead to arrive completely unannounced, exactly during the critical moment Trevor would least expect it. The day finally arrived. I remember standing outside the same corporate building I had once walked into every single morning as CEO, the building where Trevor and Walter had orchestrated my complete destruction years earlier. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nervousness, determination, and quiet confidence, knowing that this time, I held every single piece of evidence needed to reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. I walked through the main lobby, past employees who stared at me with visible shock and disbelief, some recognizing me immediately, despite the years that had passed. I made my way directly toward the executive boardroom, where Trevor was scheduled to finalize the massive international deal in front of key investors, board members, and international business partners. Imagine the tension in that hallway, employees whispering, security uncertain whether to intervene, everyone sensing that something enormous was about to unfold. I reached the boardroom doors, took one final breath, and walked inside without waiting for permission. The room fell into instant, stunned silence. Trevor, standing at the head of the table mid-presentation, froze completely, his face turning pale as he saw me standing there, calm, composed, and very much alive within the company he believed he had permanently taken from me. Walter, seated near the front of the room, dropped the papers he was holding, his mouth opening slightly in shock, unable to form any words. International investors, board members, and executives all turned toward me, confusion and curiosity spreading rapidly throughout the room. I walked calmly toward the head of the table, exactly where Trevor stood, and I placed a thick folder directly in front of him. "Please," I said calmly, "continue your presentation. I would love to hear how you plan to explain this deal, considering everything I am about to share with everyone in this room." Trevor stared at me, speechless, his hands visibly trembling. I turned toward the room, addressing everyone directly. "My name is Michael Harlow. Many of you know me as the former CEO of this company, the man publicly accused, convicted, and imprisoned for financial fraud 3 years ago." I paused deliberately, allowing the weight of my words to settle across the room. What you may not know is that those charges were completely fabricated, orchestrated deliberately by the very people who currently sit at the head of this table. Gasps spread quietly throughout the room, investors exchanging shocked glances, clearly unaware of the true history behind Trevor's rise to power. I opened the folder, presenting clear, undeniable evidence, the same evidence that had already been fully validated by an international tribunal. Digital forensic reports proving Trevor's direct involvement in creating fraudulent offshore accounts. Banking records showing funds secretly redirected into accounts controlled by Trevor and Walter. Official documentation from the International Tribunal, completely overturning my conviction and formally recognizing me as the victim of deliberate financial fraud. Imagine the shock rippling through that boardroom, international investors realizing they had just been about to finalize a massive business deal with a man legally proven to be a fraud, standing directly beside the very man he had framed years earlier. Trevor attempted weakly to respond, stammering something about misunderstandings and outdated information, but his voice lacked any real conviction, his composure completely shattered. Walter tried standing, attempting to regain control of the room. "This is completely inappropriate. We should discuss this matter privately, not during an important international business meeting." I looked directly at him, my voice calm but unmistakably firm. "You chose this exact setting years ago, Walter, when you and Trevor destroyed my life during a private meeting disguised as routine business. I believe it is only fitting that the truth be revealed in exactly the same setting." The room remained silent, tension thick enough to feel physically. One of the international investors, a respected businessman I recognized from previous industry events, finally spoke up. Mr. Harlow, if what you are presenting is accurate, this changes everything regarding our willingness to proceed with this partnership. I nodded respectfully. I understand completely, and I assure you, everything I have presented today has already been legally verified through international tribunal proceedings. I am happy to provide complete documentation to each of you individually. Within moments, the entire dynamic of that boardroom shifted dramatically. Investors began quietly gathering their belongings, clearly uncomfortable continuing any business discussions given the shocking revelations they had just witnessed. Board members, many of whom had unknowingly supported Trevor's leadership based on false narratives, began exchanging concerned glances, realizing the serious implications of what they had just learned. Trevor, desperate and cornered, turned toward me one final time. "Michael, please, we can find a way to resolve this quietly, discreetly, without damaging the company's reputation further." I looked at him, remembering every single moment of pain, humiliation, and loss I endured over the past several years, remembering my father's final months, spent heartbroken and unable to clear my name before passing away. "You had every opportunity to resolve this honestly years ago," I said calmly. "Instead, you chose deception, fraud, and betrayal. This moment, right here, is simply the direct consequence of those choices." With the legal documentation clearly presented, and with international investors already withdrawing their support, the board had no choice but to immediately suspend Trevor's position as CEO, pending a full internal and legal investigation. Walter, facing his own significant legal consequences from the international tribunal ruling, quietly excused himself from the boardroom, understanding clearly that his influence within the company and within the business community at large had been completely destroyed within a matter of minutes. Imagine the satisfaction of watching years of patient legal work, quiet determination, and unwavering resilience finally culminate in a single powerful moment of complete vindication. Over the following weeks, with undeniable legal evidence publicly available, the board formally reinstated my ownership rights and leadership position within Harlow Industries. Trevor faced immediate legal consequences, formally charged internationally with financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, charges that carried significantly harsher penalties than those I had originally faced. Walter, similarly implicated through documented evidence of his involvement in orchestrating the original fraud, faced his own separate legal consequences, effectively ending his influence within the business community permanently. As I resumed leadership of Harlow Industries, I made a deliberate choice to rebuild the company not through anger or vengeance, but through renewed integrity, transparency, and honesty, exactly the principles my father had originally built the company upon decades earlier. I personally reached out to every employee, business partner, and investor affected by the scandal, openly sharing my story, providing clear documentation, and rebuilding trust through complete transparency rather than concealment or manipulation. Within a year, Harlow Industries not only recovered fully from the scandal, but grew even stronger, attracting new international partnerships based on renewed trust, transparency, and integrity, values I made certain would define the company's future permanently. Looking back now, years later, I understand clearly that betrayal, even when devastating, can ultimately become the foundation for incredible strength and resilience. Trevor and Walter believed that fabricating evidence and destroying my reputation would permanently secure their control over something they never truly built themselves. Instead, their greed and dishonesty became the very foundation of their own downfall, while my patience, resilience, and unwavering pursuit of truth became the foundation of my ultimate return. The most powerful revenge, I learned, is not simply reclaiming what was stolen from you. It is doing so through truth, patience, and quiet determination, exposing dishonesty in exactly the place it was originally created, ensuring that everyone witnesses the undeniable truth simultaneously. If there is one lesson I want you to take from my story, it is this: betrayal, no matter how devastating, does not have to define your future. Sometimes the strongest response to injustice is patience, quiet determination, and an unwavering commitment to truth, even when the entire world seems to have turned against you. My father spent his entire life building something honest, something real. Through decades of hard work and integrity, I made certain that his legacy remained protected, not through anger or bitterness, but through patience, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to justice. And in the end, walking back into that boardroom, reclaiming everything that had been stolen from me gave me exactly the justice I had fought so hard for so long to finally achieve. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to Payback Fire for more real stories of quiet strength and satisfying justice, and leave a comment sharing your own revenge story. Sometimes the best revenge is not loud or immediate. Sometimes it is simply patience, truth, and an unforgettable return, exactly when they least expect it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.